Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enhance Pod. Today, I've got a very interesting and I want to say widely respected and accomplished guest. I want to introduce Lee John Miles, everybody. Now, he is a sports scientist. He is also a strength and conditioning specialist. I think he's widely regarded in South African football as one of the best practitioners in the game currently. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we'll jump right into the conversation. But welcome to the pod, Lee John
Thank
Miles.
you. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. What an intro. Thank you.
Lee, I want to just dive in, and I always go for like a little bit of background so the guests and listeners can, if they've been living under a rock and don't know you, they can get to know you a little bit. Talk us through your journey through sports science, studying sports sciences. How do you go into um, strength and conditioning and your journey into football? I think that's a really interesting background.
Yeah, cool. I think like most people who end up working in football, the dream was to be a footballer and a player. And yeah, like I was on track for that when I was younger. So we'll start before I actually went into sports science. It was when I was at school playing a decent level of football, and got a scholarship to go play over in the States. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I had a really, really bad knee injury, ACL, MCL, medial meniscus, the unhappy triad. And that changed the plans drastically. So I had to kind of rethink, like it was a really bad injury. It took me over a year to get back to even some form of exercise again. So I had to, think what next? Okay, I'm not going to be a football player. I still want to be involved in the game. It's what I've loved. It's what I've always loved. So I decided I had to find another way in, and that was to go and study. So I studied sports science at Stellenbosch University, and was still playing a bit of football for the university and for Stellies, but really found a passion within like the sports science realm, and it was something that kind of, luckily enough, came naturally to me, and something I really enjoyed while studying, while doing my internships. So yeah, that's how I got into the field. It wasn't plan A, but it was a very, very good plan B that I am very grateful for in the long run. Yeah, bro. So like I said, it wasn't the plan, but through other influences and other factors, I've kind of found my way into the industry and have now been in the PSL for 10 years, working as a sports scientist, S&C coach. Yeah, so it's been a blessing, and it's been a very happy and fruitful career for the most part.
Lee, I want to just ask you for listeners that are maybe sports science students or early in their journey, what's the benefit of kind of going further than just the sports science undergrad and moving into the CSCS specialist S&C qualification? Why did you choose that path?
Look, I think initially the reason I continued with my studies, obviously undergrad, honors and CSCS, etc., was to get into the industry as qualified as I could. I think looking at a lot of overseas jobs, a CSCS or an equivalent, from like the UK, or whatever, is a prerequisite to get into any kind of jobs in England, in Europe. So the initial reason for that was just in case that is the path that I was going to take, to make sure that I had that qualification in the bag. Obviously, there's a lot of guys that I've studied with that have gone that route, and I am blessed to still be in contact with them, and they are working at some really, really big teams over in Europe. And that was kind of not the goal, but that was, if that is an option, I need to be prepared. So I think that's one of the main reasons to do it. And like you would know, there's no harm in continuing your education. You're not going to do any harm in furthering your studies and learning some more things. I think just having had a lot of interns come through and work under me in my time in the league, I think I have seen a difference in terms of the readiness for professional sport, from someone who's just got an undergrad to someone who's gone on and studied something like a CSCS. I think that's not always the case, like you do get some people who've just got their undergrad and they are really, really just ready for the industry, knowledge wise, whatever. But I think more often than not, the CSS has helped with that readiness to learn more in the industry, if that makes sense.
100%. Um, I want to just follow that up with a question. So you spoke about readiness for the professional kind of level, and it is a jump. It is a kind of beast on its own. But you seem to manage to have developed the skill set as a S&C coach who is really well connected to the players, and maybe that's a tribute to your background in football and your like genuine passion for the game. But then I think you've also got a reputation in the industry as being someone with your sports science hat on now that is a bit of a wizard with some of the data and using that to make informed decisions and kind of the way that you construct your whole physical preparation program. Talk us through a little bit about how you've kind of developed that philosophy, and then we'll kind of go into the club side and chat about your time at your last two clubs.
Yeah, cool. I think the wizard is a bit of a stretch. I think I know what I'm doing, but like there's always people who can do it better than you. So there's no harm in learning from them. And within a lot of big clubs, there are people who specialize only in the data side of sports science. So I'm never going to be able to be as good as them. I can continue to learn from people like that, and I think the blessing that I had working at a club like Cape Town City is it is or was a club who used to strive to challenge to the top four of the PSL every year, right? But behind the scenes, as you know, there's not a lot of manpower. Like in the sports science department, it's just me. In the medical department, it's just the one physio. Um, so what that did was it forced me to be able to do both roles, an S&C and sports science. And again, blessing in disguise, because it forced me to improve my sports science side of my game. It's been an opportunity for me to be able to learn more within that side and that realm of sports science. So I developed a lot through having to do it. Like I said, it's just me. If I didn't do it, it wasn't going to be done, and I could have done the bare minimum and just kind of ticked a couple of boxes in terms of like key parameters to look at with regards to like GPS, for example. But that's not me. I also want to do the best job that I can do. So that forced me to learn more and to improve my skills from a sports science perspective. Yeah. So that's kind of how I've developed. And if I look at some of the data specific work that I was doing, in my first or second year in the industry, and I look back at it now, I'm like, what the heck was I doing? Like, and I'm sure that's the case for any skill that you develop through working and hours and hours of work in a high performance environment.
I want to just interject there, and I think a lot of the guests, yourself included, you being very humble in your answers here. So wizard, yes, maybe a bit of an overstretch, but I literally had Ashley De Beer, the former Catapult CSM, on the pod, and he referred to you as one of the guys that a platform or a hardware software product like Catapult would kind of say, well, if you look at industry standards and look at who's setting the industry standards, mm, Lee would be one of the guys. Ruan might be another one. I'm sure there's lots of other S&Cs and coaches, but you're probably being a little bit humble in that as well. But what I want to point out to the listeners is that I think, again, overwhelmingly across all the guests, there's a huge growth mindset there where, like you say, you could have just done the bare minimum. You could have just used the tool to say that you're using the tool, but you kind of dived in on your own. You know what I mean? You spent extra time to kind of figure out the whole thing together. Like you touched on it a little bit, but why is that important that people or aspiring professionals in the industry do more than just what's required in their current setting?
Yeah, look, I think, uh, and it might touch on a few nerves, but I think complacency becomes very easy when you are comfortable. And I've seen it, you've seen it. There are people within the industry who are comfortable and are happy to just keep ticking on, keep doing what they've done for the previous year or the previous 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. Like, uh, I don't have that mindset. I think the industry keeps moving forward. The sports science keeps evolving. And I think if you are not willing to keep evolving with it, you are going to get left behind, or unfortunately, your athletes are not going to get the most that they should be getting out of your particular role, whatever that may be. And I think that comes from a place of comfortability and complacency. And it's easy for me, like at my previous club at Cape Town City, I was in charge of the department for 7, 8 years. Um, if I was that way inclined, it would be easy to just be comfortable and keep ticking on saying, we're doing enough. But like you said, that's a lot with a lot of the guests that you've had on. That's not the mindset that they all portray, and that's not my mindset either. I want to keep up with industry standards first of all, and yeah, like not get complacent. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in the industry is seeing people get complacent. So yeah.
Lee, I want to just speak about you've touched on Cape Town City. For those who don't know, you're currently at the South African and African continental giants of football, the mighty Buccaneers, Orlando Pirates, absolute football royalty in the country and continent. But talk us through, in preparing for this episode, I was thinking you've had one of the most unique experiences, probably, that would only be, there's only you that's had this experience in the last 2 seasons, where you go from, um, obviously City did well and challenged for a long time. Then the nature of sports is one bad season and that can all end. So unfortunately, City got relegated in your last season there. You go from City being relegated to moving to Pirates, and all of a sudden you win a treble in your first season there. That is unbelievable. What a contrast. Take us through what that transition was like for you.
Yeah, like oftentimes I almost have to like pinch myself, or in speaking with our head of performance, Rowan, as you mentioned earlier, he'll often remind me like, mate, what a season, like what a change a year has made, to go from like the lowest of lows, honestly, because as like, Cape Town City is a club that gave me my start. It gave me my way into the industry, and it still holds a very special place in my heart. And to have it like end in that way was a very, very low point. And then to go from that and to the highest of highs, honestly, like sometimes I think I still have to kind of take it all in. What's happened this season? It's been like you said, a record breaking season. It's been something that not a lot of people have done at all, regardless of getting relegated the season before. So, yeah, I think for me, the one thing that I always need to remember is that, like, it's quite a cliche saying, but like failure is not always fatal, or it's not always final. And to kind of have confidence in the work that's being done. And sometimes there's nothing really that you can do, even if you've given your best. Sometimes, like you said, sport is sport. It happens. There's outside factors that you can't really control. And unfortunately, with City getting relegated, like I did take that a bit personally, and it was something I always think, what more could I have done? And then going to a club like that has been as successful as Orlando Pirates, then it almost validates that no, you actually were doing your best. But yeah, again, it does take a bit of sitting back and taking it all in to say like, yo, what we've achieved this last season is actually, it's incredible, for the club, for the fans, for everyone involved. So regardless of the relegation, the achievements kind of outweigh that from this season.
I think you make a great point, Lee, and I just want to emphasize this to guests. I think sometimes as professionals in the industry, we kind of attach our worth or our value to what the outcomes of our team is, and
100%.
you could say the best S and Cs would be the guys at Pirates because you guys are winning a treble. But look at the clubs that you guys come from, and that might not be the case. So I think the lesson there is when you're at City and you're doing your best, whether you're challenging for top four or being relegated, it's still shaping you as a professional. You change the setting, and all of a sudden you're a part of something different. And it's not because of you that City got relegated. It's not because of you that that Pirates won a treble. But you producing a really high quality of work with a lot of passion and care, and then sometimes sports will just do the rest of the story. So I think the lesson for me is don't let your setting or your team determine your worth. You could do really incredible work if you are at a first division or second division, or even just volunteering and you're really young in your career and trying to build your skill set and your sort of CV. So I think that's a great lesson for everyone to take out of it. Lee, let's just ask. I think for me, as a fan of football and as someone that's intrigued by the industry, what changes when you go from a challenging club, a competitive club like Cape Town City, to I want to say a legacy or like a royalty type of club like Pirates? What's the difference there?
I think yeah, that's exactly what you've just touched on. Is expectations are at City, like, you want to challenge for the top four. The club knows it, you know it, but like, there are bigger teams than Cape Town City in the league when I was working there. So when we did do well, it was an incredible achievement. At Pirates, the expectation is to do that. You should be challenging for the league, you know. So that's one of the big things that I have noticed, the shift in expectation from management, from the fans. There are a lot more fans of Orlando Pirates Football Club in the country than there are of Cape Town City, and they are amazing. They have filled out stadiums for us this entire season. They have been our rock at a lot of difficult games. You know, the singing and the support from the fans has played a big role in helping us get over the line. But the expectation of the fans is to win. You know, sometimes even a draw, and at Cape Town City, you could take a draw away from home. Some people are like, okay, it's a decent result. It's away from home. You've traveled. You'll take the point. At Pirates, the expectation is to win. Like, that's one of the cultures of the club, is winning. Um, so that is one of the big differences that I have noticed in coming to a club as big and as prestigious as Orlando Pirates. Is the expectation and the demand for success is a lot more pressing. Um, and the biggest difference, I would say, is also just purely the resources and manpower. Like, there are a lot of things that I was implementing to the best of my ability at my previous club that because we have the number of staff, or like the sports science department is 4 people, where it was just 1 at my previous club. So now we can kind of dive into more specifics and more attention to detail for key topics that we want to cover, or, you know. So that is one of the big differences that I have noticed as well, is just, you want to do something in the industry, it's a lot easier to do it when you have manpower and quality manpower. So yeah, those are probably the 2 biggest things that I have noticed in terms of the difference between the two, coming from a regular PSL club to a club that is expected to challenge for titles.
And maybe just on a personal level, Lee, and I'm throwing a curveball because this wasn't what I prepped you for, but from going from like a department lead to like maybe a senior professional, but someone that's a part of a team of 4, how do you transition to that as professionally? Because sometimes it's easier to lead because then you can make all the decisions, but when you're in a team of 4, there is a lot of collaboration, synergy, and oftentimes high performance can be having difficult conversations or discussions or debating ideas together. How do you manage that in your current setting?
Yeah, look, I think, like you said, when it was just me, it's kind of, I have the idea, I do the research, I make the decision, I implement, you know. Whereas now there is a lot more collaboration, there is a lot more throwing ideas out amongst each other within our department. But I think the one thing that we've been blessed with is that all 4 of us kind of have similar ideologies and methodologies with regards to sports science. Like, we all feel similar ways with regards to how players should be prepared for a game, for how the S&C work should be done. So we are very lucky that there hasn't been any clashes. We are all on the same page. We have, if, for example, if the bio is out sick, you know, any one of us can step in and do his work for him, because we all know how he would work and how we all work in a similar way, vice versa. So our head S&C had a knee operation at the beginning of the season. And because I know how he works, he knows how I work. The head of performance knows what should be done. It was kind of like a seamless transition to help step in when needed, with regards to the S&C work. So I think that is a blessing that, yes, there is that collaboration, there is more opinions, but luckily a lot of our opinions are along the same lines. And so that helps kind of make everything streamlined and helps us get to the best possible decision. Because if it's just me making a decision, it's only my idea. Now there's four of us, and someone might mention something that the others haven't thought of, like, actually, that's a really good point. Like, we should be doing that. Or vice versa. I could have an idea for an exercise, and the others would be like, I don't know that that'll work for what you're looking to achieve or whatever. And yeah, so those opinions are also very important, so that you're not just going on your own kind of intuition or your own advice. You're getting collaboration from others, which it can, and I have seen it in the industry. People have a lot of confrontation, and then it's difficult to work in an environment like that. But we have been very lucky and blessed that it hasn't been the case this season.
I think it comes down to the willingness of the people in the space to collaborate, if you know what I mean. It's easy to have a hard conversation or difference of opinion when you know that everyone's intention is to get the best outcome for the team and the players as well. So I think kudos to you guys um, for kind of creating that culture within your department. And Lee, I want to just talk a little bit into the nitty-gritty and say, what's your take on systems, processes, hardware, software? What are some of the best practices that you feel you are implementing at the moment? And it can be examples of things that where you're collaborating with rehab or return to play, profiling, monitoring. Maybe an example where you're taking some of the data and actioning that into
Yeah.
training or match decisions.
Yeah, look, I think what we do well at Orlando Pirates is we do a lot of measurements and objective data collection, and we implement a lot of change with that data. So it's one thing just to, collect the GPS data for the sake, but it's one thing to do the VALD measurements, to have them. Cool. It's good to have them, but like, are you actually making actionable insights with them? And I think that's one thing that we've done really well. So there's a very good feedback loop with regards to the sports science department, the medical department, and then to the coaches and management. So I think we have a nickname within the club called Meetings FC, because we have a lot of meetings, but those meetings are important to get information across to whoever it needs to get to. So we have meetings before every training session, and after every training session, we have debriefs, what worked well, okay, going forward for tomorrow, what are we looking at, et cetera, et cetera. So in those meetings, that's where a lot of the information will get shared with the coaches. And for example, the GPS data, we have obviously the live system, and we will adjust the session in session if needs be. But a lot of the time post session, we will, or like later that day before the next session, submit to the coaches, look, these are our findings, these are our recommendations. This is just a brief outline of what we've achieved, and this is what we are looking to achieve, if that makes sense. So we are quite good, I would say, in terms of providing feedback and trying to make changes or actionable insights with that information, be it the GPS, be it, so obviously with the VALD stuff, we do a lot of different tests. We do the hamstrings on the Nord board. We do the abduction, adduction on the force frames. We do the CMJs. We do the IMTP, the mid-thigh on the force decks. So we have a lot of info, we use that quite often. So I can also dive into a bit of what we do with regards to the VALD information. So we do the CMJs like every kind of match day +2 and -2, just as you know, like a fatigue marker, one of a few fatigue markers. So it's not the be all and end all, but it's to help paint a picture of the athlete, right? And if we see anything that's drastically stands out there, we will make actionable insight to say, hey, can we either take so-and-so, this athlete, out of the session? Can we modify him to partial training just to mitigate a bit of that fatigue? Then with regards to the profiling, like you mentioned with the other VALD tests that we do a lot of individualized work, and that data will kind of guide that work. So with regards to, let's say, we do the VALD tests every kind of 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, and sometimes when we've got congested fixtures. And we see there's an athlete who presents with, he's got a flag for like right hamstring is a lot weaker than the left or whatever. There's individual development plans that are put in place to address those issues. And that's one thing that we've done really well is individualized everything from prehab, from strength and conditioning, from technical work, from, like using that data to guide the individual plans for each athlete. And I think we've seen the benefits of that. I think we've had a really low injury rates this season. And like, yeah, all the medical data is backing up what we are doing. So it's nice to see the benefits of using that profiling and implementing specific work and seeing those benefits.
Lee, I want to just say thanks for sharing some of that. And I've got a follow-up question already, but I want to just stay on course here. Obviously, I'm quite intrigued by a lot of the Bold products, and I love to hear the adductors are a big part of it, the CMJs, etc. And now we've spoken about the tool, so we say it's the Volt suite. We say you're using the force plates, for example. I'm not really familiar with the Nordboard or the force frame just yet, but let's just look at the force plates and the CMJ. Uh, when you're looking at, and I will just use an example, when you're looking at the neuromuscular fatigue component, what metrics are you kind of looking there? And when you're kind of doing preseason intake, maybe monitoring or screening, let's say, um,
Yeah.
what metrics do you feel are more important in different phases? Because I think one of the good things is similar to GPS, there's a bunch of different metrics that you can look at that tell you things about the athlete: speed, power, acceleration, deceleration over certain timeframes, etc. But I think people need to know when to apply what. So how do you separate those two? What are you looking at on a CMJ in season versus when you're doing preseason screening?
Yeah, I think preseason is about, as you know, getting your baseline data. And the nice thing with the Vold systems is that it does a lot of that interpretation for you, so it saves a lot of the time. We're looking at a couple of different things, obviously like RSI, jump height, etc., etc. But the main purpose is longitudinal data, right? So you've got your preseason, your baseline screenings, you kind of know where they are. And then because we jump so regularly, it keeps filtering more and more and more data into each athlete's profile. So if an athlete jumps and it is screened as like a low RSI or jump height or whatever, whichever metric we're looking at, I think it does a lot of that work for us because we do so much jumping that it already flags or screens an athlete who is below his specific norm. Um, that helps us a lot in terms of, because we have 30 plus players, every +2 -2 to do CMJs, it's quite a, not chaos, but it's a lot of like, hey, have you jumped? Come jump, whatever. You know what I mean? So I think the interpretation that the Vault system gives you helps us a lot in terms of like, or not automating, but speeding up that process of interpretation. So yeah, so like I said, the more we jump, the easier it is to interpret because you just get more and more data points. And yeah, that does help us quite a lot. It's also become just part of the system, part of the process. Everyone knows on a +2 or a -2, you're jumping. So that does help us a lot because we don't have to fight guys to do their jumps. We don't have to chase them. Not all the time. Sometimes you still got to chase one or two. They are footballers at the end of the day. But yeah, so it's become just part of the process, part of the system, and the guys know like this is what's same with the IDPs, like I was speaking about. They know, okay, on this day it's this group is IDPs. They know, okay, I must go and do my thing before training, after the pre-training meeting, before whatever. They know it's part of the system. So the same goes for the force decks, the jumping. The guys, they do it. And we've got our bio does a lot of the analysis of that. Call him the head of force decks. He does a lot of that analysis, and he'll look at it and send a quick report to the coaches group and or the medical group saying, hey, this is what I've seen. Keep an eye on this player or this player. You know what I mean?
I think you've highlighted a couple of really good points there, and I just want to pull it out for the listeners that might not be using these sort of products regularly, and just kind of highlight the power there. But I think you hit the nail on the head with longitudinal data. And the more data, the more effective or more accurate it becomes. The other thing is, um, you've kind of touched about like the buy-in or the players wanting to know it, but you've also then answered that by saying a lot of your programs are individualized. I think that can often be the missing link between when guys don't want to jump or don't see the point of it. It's because they're not really seeing how that is affecting them. They might be just, okay, Lee and the performance guys are just looking at the group and how the group's moving, but actually you guys are stopping and intervening and saying, hey, you flagging, we need to manage you in this way, and there's a plan for you specifically
Yeah.
outside of the group because of what we've
Yeah.
seen, and that kind of helps them to keep buying in.
Yeah, it's not just jumping for the sake of jumping. It's jumping with a plan or a reasoning to it. And if needs be, they've seen it themselves because there are guys who flagged, who are fatigued, who get pulled out of sessions. So they kind of know this is the reason for it.
Yeah, and I think another point to touch on there is to maybe say, you touched on maybe it being automated. Yes, automated by the software kind of doing its thing, but you still have to set up your groups, dashboards,
Yeah.
tags,
Yeah. Yeah.
similarly to extract the most out of the GPS system. There's a lot of back end work to kind of set up your system. So it is still very process driven. You just first need to create a process and then refine it over time as well. So I think if someone just listened, oh, Python do a little bit of force plates and stuff. No, it's actually very systematic. It's very methodical. It's very intervention focused as
Yeah,
well.
there's a lot of work to in that goes into building these dashboards and building these like you mentioned with the GPS is the same. The amount of work initially to set up the dashboards you want for different reporting, like your weekly dashboards, your daily, your goalkeeper specific dashboards. There's a lot of work that goes into building those, but once those are built and refined, I think it does help automate that process to make it quick and efficient. But like you said, it doesn't just happen. You don't just log on and it happens. It does take quite a bit of work on the initial setup. But once that's done, you've kind of put in the hard work and then can kind of reap the benefits of making the process smoother from there.
Lee, I want to throw you another curveball here just because the conversation's flowing so nicely. You touched a little bit on availability having a high association with outcomes in terms of winning. You guys have won
Yes.
trophies. You say your availability is really high. I 100% believe that. On the flip side, let's take the example of what's happened. I know you're a football fan across the globe, so let's look at what's happened to Spurs in the last 2 seasons where injuries have really affected their outcome and they narrowly missed out on relegation. In your experience from the injury from the industry, how important is this thing of avoiding, preventing, and I put preventing in air quotes because we know it's statistically impossible, but let's say maybe reducing risk of injury.
Yes. Yeah.
How much focus do you guys have on that as a sports science team, and how do you collaborate with your sports medicine team to kind of address that kind of fear that we all have?
Yeah. Look, I think most importantly to note, like as you just mentioned, injuries happen in sport. In football, they happen. There's some injuries that you literally cannot do anything to prevent, right? What we like to do, and what you've touched on as well, is injury rate reduction or risk reduction work that call it prehab, call it IDPs, call it whatever you want. There's a lot of work that's being done to try and mitigate that risk of injury. Whether that is training load management, whether that's trying to make sure that no guys are underloaded or overloaded with regards to like the on-field, whether that's musculoskeletal, so there's no major imbalances or risk factors with regards to anything from a muscular perspective. So you've got very strong hamstrings and very weak quads, for example. We would try and uh, do certain work and certain exercises to try and change that or try and reduce that gap over time. So that's where the IDPs come in a lot with regards to the musculoskeletal stuff. Someone's got very weak groins. We know that, hey, that's actually a risk factor. Let's try and strengthen those groins. So we do a lot of work with regards to that. And like I mentioned earlier, it has been very beneficial because we've seen that we've been lucky enough to not have a lot of serious long-term injuries, and the guys who've come back from those long-term injuries have not had any re-injuries. They've successfully returned to play without any kind of major injuries post returning. So we do place a lot of emphasis on that. There is a lot of collaboration with the medical department. I think that is where our head of performance comes in, is he kind of oversees the synergy between high performance, medical, coaches, and he does a good job in making sure that everyone has all the information that they need to give the athlete the best. So the physios will have seen something, maybe they will present that information, we'll collaborate, and this is how we can address this issue so that the player has the lowest possible risk of injury. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's things that are above your control. And, like a big thing for us is obviously training load management or just general load management from guys. And we have seen one or two little injuries or niggles or whatever from excessive load, but that happens sometimes when you've got players that you just can't rotate. And that happens in every sport. You've got key players that would it be beneficial to give them a break on the weekend because they've played, 3 games in 7 days or 10 days or whatever? Sure. But sometimes you just can't do that because they might be the difference between winning and losing. So it is a balance between knowing the risks of playing certain players in certain games, but from a medical and sports science perspective, we do a lot of work to try and mitigate that risk. So if we know that, for example, there's a player that is going to play on the weekend and he has higher load, we can try and reduce his training throughout the week leading to the game. So that's how we kind of try and fix that issue or address that issue rather, in saying, is he really needed on a match day +2 to be on the field? Like, no, give him an extra day of recovery, of off-feet recovery. Is he really needed on a -3 or -4 when we're doing the conditioning work? Well, no, not really, because he's done a lot of his load in the game already. So, okay, we'll take him out of that session. So that's how we address it from a load perspective. And then, like I said, we do a lot of work from a muscular perspective in addressing issues that we flag in players as well.
I think you've mapped that out really nicely, Lee. But again, just to emphasize to listeners, you can't make those decisions without gathering a lot of objective data and building credibility and rapport with your coaching staff to say, hey, when our SNCs or sports scientists flag XYZ, it's important that we allow them to action their intervention because we know that availability is something as an organization we buy into, and we all kind of back this approach. So it seems like you guys are getting a lot of things right, and I guess the proof is in the pudding this season. But yeah, just excellent. And I mean, in future, Ruan, if you're listening to this episode sometime in the future, I'm coming for you too. Before you guys head out for preseason, hopefully we can get Ruan on as well. The guy that seems to be integral in architecting this system and process at Pirates. Obviously, he was key in setting a lot of things up at Stellenbosch FC as well. But yeah, it seems like you guys have built a really great system there. Lee, I want to
I
just
think,
I can't believe
sorry,
this.
Nick,
Sorry,
if
go
I
for
can
it.
jump
Go for
in
it.
there, I think there's a very, very important point that you touched on that I haven't necessarily mentioned yet, is that the buy-in from the coaches is massive, 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 because what I teach all my interns, your number one rule as a sports scientist is to advise. You give the information. At the end of the day, it is the coaches who make the final decision, or the management or whatever. They make the final decision. So the fact that we have a coach or coaches who do buy into a lot of the information and the like the recommendations from the sports science department is a big factor, because you do get coaches who don't buy in, and that makes our jobs very difficult. So like you're saying, yes, there's a lot of work that's being done and it's all working well, but that is in a large part because we do get a lot of that buy-in from the coaches. The most success I've had working in football has always been when coaches are willing to, accept that information and be like, this is your area of expertise, we will take that information and use it. You know what I mean? So yeah, that is a big factor this season that's also been very beneficial for us, is that we have worked with coaches who are very open to the information and the suggestions.
And I just want to reference a quick paper, but I think there's quite a big UEFA study that looks at coaching leadership style. And when there's a big collaborative approach and looking for systems and advice from different departments within the team to make decisions, it always seems to lead to better outcomes, whether it's performance and win-loss or whether it's just player availability. So, yes, you can go Google that paper if you want to. Lee, I can't believe how quickly this conversation is flying, but I need to kind of bring us home here. But to the young sports scientist that's like you, finished at Stellenbosch, has ambitions of being in professional football or professional sport otherwise, what advice would you give yourself 12 years ago before you got into football, knowing what you know now?
Well, I always tell the interns that I've had in the past, you've got to put your time in. You got to put skin in the game. I did 6 months unpaid internship, not a cent from the club, but I knew that it was kind of a foot in the door. And if I did a good job, they would kind of remember me when looking for someone to bring in at some stage. So I think you've got to be willing to, especially when you're young, you're just out of studying, you got to be willing to make those sacrifices and be willing to do internships and to learn and to not start earning massive salaries straight away, because that's not going to happen. And I think I have had one or two interns who've come through who've kind of expected a job straight away, and that's not always the case, particularly in our industry. So the one advice I would be to be willing to put your skin in the game, to put in your hours, to put in your sacrifices, which I'll tell people. When I started at Cape Town City, they didn't have a training base. So I was with the first team in the morning. We were training out in Sunningdale in Cape Town. And then the DDC team at the time was training at NY49 in Guguletu. So I was driving from Lakeside, because I moved back in with my parents, to Sunningdale, to Googs, back home. And that was every day unpaid. Or if it's not unpaid, it's like 1,000 rand petrol allowance type of thing. You know what I mean? So after studying, finishing cum laude, I moved back in with my parents. That was already the first thing to be like, I'm not going to get a job straight away. You have to put in those sacrifices. So that's the one thing that I would say is, especially for young upcoming sports scientists, is be willing to do that. And the second thing is, the industry is not always as glamorous as it seems. And you'll know this as well. Particularly in football, there's a lot of traveling, it sounds nice staying in hotels. It's very fun for the first kind of year in professional football. But if you have a family, if you have kids, it is a lot of time away from that. So that is a sacrifice, again, that you are going to have to make if you want to work in this industry. So if that's something you're okay with, if that's something you can deal with, sure. But it is a big, big issue that a lot of people not struggle with, but have to adapt to, that there's a lot of time spent traveling or away from home, or particularly if you are in like the CAF Champions League, for example, you are traveling all over Africa, plus local games, like it's a lot. So that's another something just to take in mind. Like if I was 12 years ago, I would still 100% do it because this is what I love, but not everyone has that same, some people just want Monday to Friday, cool, my weekends are off. Yeah. So, and that brings one more point. There's not a lot of off days in football. There's not days of the week. You go according to when you play. So, like, for example, everyone has a public holiday off. Nah, you've got training. Like, it's match day -2. You've got to train. So that's something to take into consideration as well.
And I don't think people outside of the football industry realize how relentless South African football is in general. If we just take the PSL, then you add at the big clubs, you're playing Champions League at the same time, and you add that together, and the calendar is hectic. So like, even just to get you guys on an episode, my only window is really in the off season, because I know
Off
that you got a
season,
little bit of downtime. Yeah, but I mean, your off season isn't really that long comparatively either, because you do preseason tour and get back in the office. So I think these are the things that people don't really consider when they have construct these ambitions. And it's fine, aim for it, but also I think upskill yourself or do a little bit of research into like what it all entails as well, and just make sure it's the ladder that you want to climb, because the time and effort that it takes to get to the level where you're at now, Lee, is there's a lot of huge amount of sacrifice involved. The worst thing is, I think, for people to climb to the top of that ladder and then realize, oh shucks, this is actually not what I wanted, and then you've got to pivot and segue. So yeah, I want to ask you one last question. Um, I could we could do 2 hours here if you gave me half a chance. Um, Lee, where do you think sports science S&C in football is going? Let's take it on three levels: globally, on the continent, and then in South African football.
Very interesting question. I think we, as a continent, have done a lot of catching up to the standards being set in Europe. When I started, GPS was not a normal thing. Like only one or two clubs kind of had GPS. Now it's like it's uncommon if you don't have it. I think with regards to keeping up with the standards, we are doing a lot better. I don't think anyone within the African continent is necessarily setting the standards as of yet. I don't think that's an impossibility. But what I will say is that coming to a club like Pirates, I have seen that more manpower and resources and funding does play a big role in that. So speaking to colleagues or mates of mine that are working at a club like Crystal Palace, for example, I will pick his brain and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And there's not an awful lot that they are doing that we are not doing, but they've been doing it for 2-3 years and we are now catching up, if that makes sense. So I don't think the gap is massive in terms of what's happening within sports science, in terms of Europe versus Africa versus the PSL. I think within the PSL, we are quite high in terms of Africa, in terms of what we do as sports scientists. In terms of the football as a whole, I think there's a lot of studying and researching into fatigue management because, I mean, football is a commercial game, and players are playing a ridiculous amount of football. It's a World Cup now that you speak about us being busy and how relentless our schedule is, and the only time you get to see us is off season. A lot of players don't have the off season because they're in the national team. We've got 8 guys who are in the Bafana setup. They don't have an off season, so it's not an easy one. And I think there's a lot of fatigue management and studying how we can look after these guys better because, I mean, there was a stage, and as you saw, like you mentioned with Tottenham, there's a lot of injuries which greatly affect teams. And a lot of those injuries are purely just down to the amount of football that some of these guys are having to play. Yes, it's a privilege. There's a lot of people in the world who would love to play football for a living and get paid, but they are still human beings. They're athletes that will break down if you push them too much. So I think that might be, in my opinion, where the industry is going, is just managing that fatigue of having footballers play so many games in a year.
I think we're seeing it as a theme that's getting spoken about a lot. And the flip side to that coin is people saying, yeah, but these guys earn so much, they're like there for our entertainment, but like let's maybe bring it back to like human rights and how we should be treating people. It's the quality of football is going to decline if we keep on just adding.
Yeah,
So
and the
let
injury rates are gonna skyrocket.
100%. One more selfish question, Lee. Where do you think, and I'm just interested in this, wearing my ultra human ring, and a lot of the cricketers that I work with, Whoop is big in cricket. You'll see it if you turn on the cricket today, England, New Zealand, you'll see guys bowling and batting with their Whoop bands. What's the role of wearables coming into football? Do you see there's a space for that and integrating that maybe into your athlete management system and the way that you profile monitor?
100%, bro. I think a lot of the athlete management systems that you look at have the capacity to integrate your Whoop data or your Aura Ring data or whatever. It's for a reason. Like, there's so much benefit to tracking sleep. Like, as you know, sleep is such a big part of recovery. I know a few of our guys, they do have the wearables. Like you see some of them during training, as you're about to start, they're busy fiddling with their watches and whatnot, just to make sure that they track absolutely everything, even though we're doing that as well. But I think it is definitely something that the industry is it's going to become a norm in the industry. As you said, these guys, yes, they're humans, but they are athletes who we have them for 2-3 hours a day. The rest of the day, they are on their own kind of. So it's just a way to make sure that they are doing what they should be doing to get the best possible performance. And I think Yeah, it's going to become a norm. I have seen it already. There's a lot of guys who do have their own, but I think clubs and uh, if it's not already happening in a lot of European teams, it's going to start happening. That they are wearing wearables just to track things like sleep, like your HRV, your heart rate variability, and that type of thing. It's just like you said, the more data, the better, because you can have a more complete picture, and that is an important data set that is not always captured. So yeah.
Lee, I want to just say thank you for your time. Thank you for an incredibly interesting conversation. I'm not just saying that. Thank you for sharing some of the insights and the behind the scenes. Like, I think offline, I said the reason why we're doing this podcast is also to kind of show people behind the curtain of what's happening in the most sort of elite spaces. And I think you're someone that's spanned a whole spectrum of spaces. And I don't think Pirates is your pinnacle either. So we look forward to wherever the journey might take you next. I wish you all the best for the coming up season. It's hard to outdo a treble, but I'm sure you guys will find a way of doing something equally as impactful, or maybe dominate the league in football like a lot of fans want to see. But yeah, thanks for sharing your time. Thanks for your knowledge and your insight and wisdom. And if people want to connect with you, are you happy? I'm going to link your Instagram. You're not the most active Insta guy, but it's there. LinkedIn is probably another way to do it. And I would say if you're a young, ambitious clinician, professional, sports scientist, shoot your shot and reach out to Lee. And you never know where conversations, networks will take you over time. So yeah, thanks, Lee. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
Just thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Like I said to you offline as well, the caliber of guests that you have had on this podcast and starting is incredible. So to be asked to be on the episode, it's been a privilege. And I think just to touch on your point about reaching out, mate, there's no harm in reaching out. Like I did it when I started in the industry. I still do it. If there are any young sports scientists, like you said, shoot your shot. I'm always happy to help, to give advice where I can, and to help others in the industry develop as well. So reach out. I'm always happy to help. And yeah, once again, just thanks so much for having me, bro. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Lee. If you're listening and you've made it all the way to the end, make sure that you are sharing this episode with a friend who might be interested. Also, review us on Spotify. That always helps our reach kind of grow. And make sure you are following the podcast so that as new episodes come out, you receive it first. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.